While technically not a must-win game, if Missouri is going to reach its goals, it simply has to beat Kansas. But you know who else thinks something similar? The Jayhawks. So let's break down the enormous stakes in Week 2. Right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And I'll tell you this, coming up on the show, I've got a bit of a bone to pick with FanDuel. Missouri discounted once again by the betting public. Yes, I'm going to give one of our longest sponsors a piece of my mind a little bit later in the program, and also talk about just who, along with Missouri, of course, might make their first college football playoff appearance this season. But you know what? I want to start off, I should say, talking about the Missouri and Kansas game once again, because to me, the implications here are just massive, not only from the Missouri perspective, but of course from the Jayhawks perspective too, because I really think that similar to 2023, Week 2 against Kansas State, I think Missouri needs this win to get the season off on the right foot and have a successful season. Now, the good news is less pressure for Eli Drinkwitz and this program in 2025 than there was in 2023. Not only that, well, the Tigers are 6.5-point favorites right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook. My memory is the Tigers were certainly underdogs going into the Kansas State game in 23. I believe they were about 5.5-point underdogs, maybe 3.5, something like that. I think it was about 3.5 because there was a lot of Missouri fans that were surprised by how low the line was. That much I remember. But regardless, the point here is that I think even though there's technically, of course, there's no conference implications here, I do believe in momentum, especially with a young team, a team of a new group, a team that in Week 4 is going to be playing South Carolina, a team that early in the season is going to be playing the Alabama Crimson Tide. If you get off to the wrong foot, and obviously losing to Kansas in Week 2 would be the wrong foot, well, I think the season just has the potential at least to kind of go off of the rails a little bit. And similarly, I think Kansas thinks that this is a game that they absolutely need to win too. And even though, again, Missouri is 6.5-point favorite, you look at all the odds to win the national championship or just projections for the season, that type of deal, there's nobody that's projecting Kansas to be better than Missouri. And yet, speaking of odds, you look at the odds to win, well, each team's respective conference. The Tigers are about 90-1 at last check to win the SEC, whereas Kansas 15-1 to win the Big 12. So the Jayhawks at least think they have an outside chance, realistically, to win this league. And again, even though obviously losing to Missouri is not going to hurt Kansas at all in the Big 12 standings, again, for all the people who argue against the idea of momentum in football, I happen to believe that there's something to it. I think the Eli Drinkwitz teams of the last couple seasons who famously won, 80, 90% of their close games, depending on how you define a close game, I don't think it's all just luck. I do think there's something to the belief that builds on itself over time. I think anybody who doesn't believe in that, at least to some extent, has never participated in a team sport in particular. Group mentality is a real thing. It can be both positive and negative, and it's usually not neutral, let's put it that way, because, well, there aren't any more ties in college football and not a lot of ties in terms of how you feel after the game anymore either. The bottom line is, while the Tigers on paper have the superior roster, have more talent, certainly have more money flowing into the coffers of the Missouri football program, does Missouri over Kansas, I should say? Well, Kansas undoubtedly has the more experienced player at quarterback, number one, Jalen Daniels. Lance Leopold certainly seems like a good tactician and a good head coach. So, and most importantly, this is an enormous rivalry game with huge implications that has not been played since any of these kids were basically old enough to remember it. So I think whichever side feels like and takes this game as seriously as it used to be taken for 100+ years before it was put on pause for more than a decade, well, I think that team is truly going to have an advantage, if not tactically, if not in terms of talent and physicality on the roster, and even at the line of scrimmage, on the outside, at quarterback, whatever it might be. I do think traditionally in these types of rivalry games throughout college football history, that emotional element has played an enormous role. I just think it's going to be really interesting to see how these two sides, how they play this game, how they play it from an emotional perspective. I'm sure both coaches will probably tell you it's just a normal game, but I'm telling you, we'll find out pretty quickly in the first quarter if that's really true or not. I just think that if you're a Missouri squad, you got to know that Kansas has every bit as much of a maybe more realistic goals, certainly to win the championship of their conference. If you look at the competition in the Big 12 versus the SEC, you look at the odds there. So if you're a Kansas football team, you're hyping yourself up and saying, let's go in and steal a road game here against a traditional rival and get ourselves on the right track, maybe on the outside chance of winning a Big 12 championship. If you're Kansas at this point, why wouldn't you think that way? So if you're Missouri, to say the least, don't look past the Jayhawks. This is a game, I think if you're going to have a successful season, you got to win it. And, of course, technically that's not true. Missouri technically could go 11-1 with a loss to Kansas. I would certainly consider that a success, but how likely is that actually to happen, by the way? I'd say 12-0 counterintuitively is actually more likely to happen than that. A team that was that good but that would then lose to Kansas would be a bit of an odd outcome for sure. But regardless, I just want to see all the Missouri players and coaches. I just want to see them take this rivalry as seriously as it should be, because I have a feeling the Jayhawks will. And yes, I do have a bone to pick with my friends over at FanDuel. The Tigers' odds have moved once again, and not in a favorable direction. I have to say I'm fairly shocked by this. I thought Missouri was already a decent value. Well, I guess they're an even better value depending on which way you look at it. Regardless, the Tigers have been discounted once again. I am not a fan whatsoever. But you know what? One way or the other, we're going to profit on this travesty, I'll tell you this. And summer sports, by the way, are in full swing. And, of course, FanDuel is the best way to make all of these games and events even more exciting. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups and odds, by the way, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to get in on the action. And if you're new to FanDuel, well, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So there is no doubt that Missouri has won a lot of close games in the last couple of seasons, and indeed, over the long term, nobody's going to win 80 to 90% of said close games. So you know how Missouri can remedy that problem over the long term? Have fewer close games. Yes, let's just start blowing everybody out. How's that for a strategy? It's just as simple as that. But you know what? Over at FanDuel Sportsbook, I have to say I'm kind of stunned to see that Missouri's over-under which I thought was already a decent value. 7.5, the total for Missouri's season win total. I already thought, hey, 8-4, that sounds like a pretty good deal to me, especially that's basically where I've been sitting all off season. My prediction, nothing official, but I've been thinking about 8-4 all off season. So if you're going to give me that plus odds, you're going to pay me essentially plus 130, whatever the heck it used to be. Well, I will take that. Well, now it's gone the other way. In fact, down Missouri 6.5, the odds. The win total, I should say, over at FanDuel Sportsbook. And I have to say that surprises me based on not only how successful Missouri has been over the past couple seasons. Again, sure, you can say, well, they've won a lot of close games. They're due to go back the other way. Well, in terms of due, we can quibble with the phrase due. I would say that after all the horrible luck that Missouri had in 2022, maybe it was due to have some good luck the other way. The reality is what happened in the past really has no bearing on what's going to happen in the present or the future. That's the reality there. But to me, the Tigers have been overly discounted here because, quite simply, this time of year, for all the projections and all the talks by talking heads like myself, the reality is we know a lot less than we like to act. We like to figure out that we like to pretend like we have it all figured out, but really we know nothing. And especially in, I think, this modern age, I think the portal makes everything more unpredictable than it's ever been. You get new guys throughout the entire league at all types of different positions. And heck, you've got, by my count, you've got 10 SEC teams with new quarterbacks, new starting quarterbacks. Some like Arch Manning, for example, at Texas, were already on the roster, but obviously Arch was not the starter last season. So I'm figuring him in to my count there. The point is, I just think in the portal, you're going to see a lot of successes. You're going to see a lot of failures too. And I just think it's going to be very unpredictable on how this all plays out, especially since we don't have years and years of data to figure out which coaches and which programs necessarily handle all of this the best. All of this adds up to me to an unpredictable season of SEC football, more unpredictable than certainly we've seen historically. So to me, I think discounting Missouri to 6.5 there, I think that's a value. I really do. Of course, now at that number, you're going to have to pay for it. You're going to have to pay the juice on going over, unlike the number at 7.5. If none of that makes any sense, well, maybe just ignore the actual betting part of this advice. The idea is, I just think it's going to be interesting to see when, after a season where Missouri finished, by the way, advanced stats, Bill Conley over at ESPN.com, had Missouri finishing 19th in the country last season. They're projected 21st this season. So a very similar type of projection to a team that went 10-3, a very, very similar schedule. Again, we're talking just regular season here. So 9 wins in the regular season last year. 6.5 versus 9. Even if Missouri goes 500 in their close games, I'd say they're still going to win 7 or more. So to me, that's value. One reason, of course, I think you're getting a discount on Missouri is quite simply branding. I think you're paying for the big-time brands in college football, especially when you bet on them in the futures market. Game to game, it's a little different. I think single games are a little bit different. I think more of an accurate reflection of reality. But especially these futures bets, like odds to win the SEC, for instance, well, you look at the odds to win the league, and the media picked Missouri 12th. I think a lot of Missouri fans, including myself, were a little bit surprised to see that. But if you look at the odds to win the league, well, Missouri also 12th, which in and of itself is not that much of an insult. I just think the gap between Missouri, who is 90-1 to win the SEC, and Oklahoma, which is 22-1 to win the SEC. That spread there, the difference between those two numbers, just doesn't really reflect any projections that I've seen so far. Again, back to S&P Plus, I said Missouri already 21st in terms of projections nationally, while Oklahoma 16th. Okay, 5 spots. Is that the difference between 90-1 and 22-1? No, I think the difference is, well, frankly, the history of the Big Red Machine and the Oklahoma Sooners versus Missouri's history, which, frankly, is not comparable. But, again, in 2025, I'm not sure how much that matters. I think I'm surprised, again, that how much 7.5 the Sooners favored over Missouri. I think that's a value as well, and I think it's simply you're just paying for branding. Maybe over the long term, that's going to still turn out to be a good idea because history says, and a lot of projection models still include, especially recent winning and recent history, and of course recent recruiting success as well. And throughout college football history, heck, the best measure, the best predictor, I should say, of future success was usually past success. Simply put, the Blue Bloods, for the most part, have stayed the Blue Bloods, but I just think the distribution of wins, especially in the SEC and in the Big Ten in particular, I think it's going to start spreading out more over time, but we shall see. And college football commentator, former Colorado quarterback too, Joel Klatt, of course, not always the biggest supporter of the Southeastern Conference, to say the least, but you know what? He does have some nice things to say about those plucky Missouri Tigers. In fact, yes, could be one of the most likely teams to make its first college football playoff, according to Klatt. Let's talk about that after these quick words. So, of course, not everyone questions the Missouri Tigers. In fact, my colleague Jimmy Stein over at Locked On Bama said, hey, that Missouri Tiger team is a really, really good football team. He's about as high on that roster as Eli Drinkwitz. But like I said, Joel Klatt had some nice things to say about Missouri as well on the Joel Klatt Show, this particular graphic put together by On3, by the way. Well, as you can see here, 10 teams most likely to make their first college football playoff appearance. Missouri coming in number 6. Number 1, the Fighting Illini of Illinois. That surprised me a bit. I know Illinois finished the season strong and had an excellent season for the Fighting Illini. No question about that. But you know what? Sort of like Missouri, I think the favorable schedule does factor in here a bit. And certainly Illinois, I think, has an easier schedule than Missouri, but you know what? You're not hearing as much talk about that versus Missouri's schedule for whatever reason. Whoever's, I don't know, all that extra money that the Big Ten has per team, I guess they're paying some publicists or something like that to get out the word on all of their different narratives that the Big Ten has been liking to push here over the last couple weeks or so. But you look at Illinois' schedule, they do have Ohio State, and they do have Ohio State in Champaign. But other than that, only Indiana is the only projected top 25 team right now on Illinois' schedule. Of course, USC is on the schedule, Washington, Wisconsin, some big-time name programs there, but still a pretty manageable schedule for the Illinois, about as manageable as it's going to get in the Big Ten. So I have to say I'm a little surprised to see Illinois number 1. I would have probably had Ole Miss number 1, who unbelievably missed out on the playoff last year. That was a really, really good Ole Miss team that lost 3 games by about 14 total points or something like that. Oof, man, remember when they beat down Georgia and then lost to Florida somehow the next week? That had to be one of the great gut punches of all time. But I digress. The point here is that, hey, you've got South Carolina, another SEC team, Miami, Iowa, Missouri, USC, Kansas State, Florida, and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So a lot of erstwhile Missouri rivals there, and some new ones as well in South Carolina, and one that's about to pick up here in a few years in the Illinois Fighting Illini as well. Also, Missouri's Music City Bowl opponent there in Iowa. So a bunch of interesting names there. I just don't necessarily see it with Florida in their schedule. The thing is, I think Joel Klatt wisely looking at the schedules because, well, one thing that hasn't changed since the BCS era, at least so far, just win, baby. That's all that seems to matter. Not all that seems to matter, but it is the number one thing, especially if you're in a Power 4 conference. Just continue to rack up those victories, schedule be damned, and you'll probably find yourself in the college football playoff. So, once again, for the umpteenth time, 10 wins, if you're Missouri, I think just about no matter how you get them, well, that'll get you a berth. Now, of course, in the transfer portal, for the most part, SEC teams are bringing in guys that can play immediately, that are plug-and-play type of players that will at the very least compete strongly for a spot in the two-deep rotation at any position. And at quarterback, well, obviously you want an experienced veteran for the most part. There are notable exceptions to this, of course, but if you look at the SEC right now, the SEC is very, very heavy on experience. And you know what? The Missouri Tigers are no exception to that. A lot of Missouri's experience, though, comes from other places. Kevin Coleman, for example, has played all over college football, but obviously this is his first season with Missouri. And there's a lot of other examples through that. In fact, there are examples through that of that on every single team in this league. And to me, it's this variable that makes college football and this league more unpredictable than ever. At least, again, for the millionth time, that's my theory. I could totally be wrong, and we'll just get a bunch of chalk this season in college football. I doubt it, though. I think it's going to be an interesting season. So, you know what? Hopefully this has been an interesting podcast. I think we're off to a strong start here on the first week back to 5 days a week here full-time on Locked On Mizzou. Hopefully you've enjoyed it this week. I'll be back next week, by the way, talking with the Locked On Penn State guys about, yes, none other than Bo Prabula. Going to have plenty of great content for you as practice starts next week. So I'll be excited for that. Hopefully you'll be excited to join me next week right here on Locked On Mizzou.